Welcome everybody to the 1860 Club. It's fantastic to be today with Brent Paul. Brent, welcome.
Good to be here, Lee. That's good to catch up with you again.
Just by way of introduction, Brent played with the club from around about 68, 69, so the late 60s into the early 70s. He's got a big story to sort of tell us, so we won't waste any time. We'll get into it. Brent, great to see you, and you're looking fit as you ever did, to be quite honest.
Well, there are a few aches and pains there.
How old are you?
81.
81?
Yeah.
You're doing well.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks for that, but the pain's inside. No.
So you were from Adelaide?
I am, and I grew up there. I spent 26 years in Adelaide, and when I'd finished my studies, I came over to Melbourne.
Yeah.
I was working at Maribyrnong. But I'll come to that. But I'll go back to the Adelaide days. My family really weren't very sports conscious, but for some reason I can recall that one day chatting to my dad, he said, "Oh, the Indian cricketers are coming out to play against Australia," and that stuck in my mind. That I looked it up. It had to be 1947, the 47-48 tour, and I can't recall anything after that for some time, and then I must have remembered his comment, and I said to him, "Dad," I said, "how do we get on in that cricket series?" He said, "Oh, we won it all right." He said, "Of course, we had a guy called Don Bradman, and he's the best in the world." So that's the first time I heard of Don Bradman.
Yeah.
And then nothing must have really registered even through that 1948 tour of England, but what I can recall is that when Fred Brown came out for the 1950-51 Ashes tour, I was really into cricket at that stage. I'd had the ABC cricket book, I knew every player, and I think they probably had broadcasts in that by that time, and I used to listen to that when I could, and so I knew that at that stage I was really keen on it. Now, I would have been at primary school, and the primary school never had a cricket team. So even though a guy called John Lill went through the same school I did, and he also went through the secondary school and university as well.
Yeah.
So I followed his footsteps, but not nearly as well.
Yeah.
However, there was some neighbours who took me to my first test match, and this was would have been December 1951, and it was at the Adelaide Oval, and it's engraved in my memory, Lee. It was just the most amazing day's cricket, because Bradman had retired, Lindsay Hassett had become the captain, but he was injured, and so Arthur Morris was the captain. The West Indies had the three Ws, Worrell, Weeks and Walcott. They had Ramadan and Valentine. They were a pretty strong outfit. Australia had most of the test players. We had a couple of South Australians in Graham Hole, who was one of my sort of heroes, and Jeff Noblet. So West Indies won the toss. It had rained overnight. There were no covers on the wicket. So there's this wet wicket, and Australia were bundled out for 81. Graham Hole made 23, 25, and what I still recall is that he played a shot down to the long third-man boundary. They didn't have a shortened boundaries in those days, and he ran a 5, which is pretty unique. You wouldn't see it these days. So anyway, all out for 81. West Indies went in, and I can still recall Everton Weeks hitting a square cut off Keith Miller that went like a tracer bullet, and I still think it hit the boundary on the full, but I probably couldn't see it well enough. But they made 105, and Australia had to go in before stumps a short period and reverse the batting order. So they started off with numbers 10 and 11, which was, I think, Bill Johnston and Noblet. They got knocked over, and Ring and Langley were still there at stumps. So we were 2 for 20 at stumps, 22 wickets for 200 runs. It was just, you couldn't have had a better introduction to Test cricket, so I was hooked.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Who won the test?
West Indies won it eventually.
Gee.
Yeah. It was hard fought, but when the wicket dried out, they started making runs on it.
Yeah.
So that was that. And then I got to secondary school, and Dad had put his pennies together and got me into Prince Alfred College. I started in the under-13s, the first cricket I'd played, actually in anger. And by the time I got to the under-15s, I was put into the first 11. Now, the first 11, along with St Peter's and Adelaide Boys High, all played in B-grade district cricket. Okay. So we were up against men.
Yeah.
And there used to be, at the end of the year, calendar year there used to be a game between Prince Alfred and St Peter's College. It was played with Sheffield Shield Hours. Yeah. So in that first game, the first time I came across John Bradman, son of. And we had a guy playing for us called Brian Hearn, and Brian played a lot of state cricket for South Australia, all-rounder. The first game I played in the firsts, I had very early success as a bowler and had a couple of wickets up quickly.
You bowled medium fast.
Yes, I did. Yeah. I'd like to think a bit quicker than that, but it's all in the eye.
It's okay.
I'm the beholder. But then two guys got in. They both made 100, and we were coming up towards stumps. And of course, I'd never played such long hours before. And I was bowling again, and I got hit through the covers, almost to the boundary. And the rest of the team, the players in the covers were pretty tired. And Brian Hearn ran from mid-on all the way to the cover boundary to pick the ball up and throw it in. And later on, I thought, well, that's the sort of attitude you need if you're going to succeed and get into the higher grades. And
yes. Which you did. You got into district firsts in Adelaide.
I did.
With university.
I did. Mm. I'll just mention that the second of those games I played in, because John Bradman played in that and he made 100.
Right.
And he was a pretty fair player, very correct. Didn't have the flair of his father, but he also went on and played district cricket, first grade district cricket. But he just couldn't handle the having to be the son of. Yeah. He was a good jazz player. A very good athlete. I think he was a very good hurdler, but he just dropped out of sight there after that. Mm. Played though with Ian Chappell in those years, and I sort of spend time occasionally thinking to myself that my technique was as good as that of Ian Chappell and John Corsby, who also played a lot of South Australia, who was in our side. And I thought, where did I miss out? Yeah. And I think there are two or three things. It's one is that the really good players, and Jack Potter told me about Vivian Richards here when he was at the academy. They did videos of Vivian Richards batting, and they had some expert there who said that Richards picked up the ball from the hand quicker. Mm. His reaction time was quicker than anyone else they'd ever sort of examined. Mm. So I think that is one thing. The second, of course, is the desire to succeed and ability to concentrate. And I used to get to 30 or 40 and I'd do something silly. Yep. I never really kept my head down long enough to get through and make big scores. Yeah.
Were you playing grade cricket when you got transferred to Melbourne?
Yes, yeah. I was. I went to university. I had this one fantastic year as a bowler. I actually, back at school when I started playing for the first, I also opened the batting. Right. My job then was just to hang around and see the new ball off, and I probably developed an attitude that I had to stay in rather than score quickly. Yeah. But I had this season where I just couldn't stop taking wickets. Mm. And I played I was still in B grade at that point, and I came over to Melbourne with the intervarsity team to play Melbourne Uni. We also had another game against Tasmania, which I took wickets in. And so I had the new ball, and I was bowling first ball to this left-hander for Melbourne University. And it's fairly well up, and it went back past me like a rocket for 4. And that guy was Bob Cowper.
Right.
And
Fair play.
he just ended up making hundreds all the time in those games. And then we also played a friendly game back in Adelaide against a team of ex-South Australian Test players. And it included Gil Langley, Graham Holt again, Les Favell, Gavin Stevens, Bruce Dooland, a guy called Merv Waite going back a fair bit. But it was an amazing bunch of players. And I came on to bowl, and I was bowling to Gavin Stevens, and who'd been in the Test side quite recently. And I had him dropped at first slip, and I thought, well, they're the breaks.
Yeah.
But then I bowled him.
Right.
And I thought, how good is this?
Yeah.
So the next over, I'm up against Les Favell, and I'm feeling pretty pumped up. And I run in, I'll drop one short, and it gets up around just under shoulder height.
Yeah.
And wham, he's whacked behind point. as if it's been shot out of a gun. And I thought, I went back, and a couple of balls later, I dropped one short, and that one ended up in the grandstand. So I thought, there's a bit of a difference in class here. So, but they were good memories of being in Adelaide. The second, I track back a bit. The second season I played at school for the first, Brian Hearn had a brother called Malcolm Hearn. And Malcolm was nowhere near as good a player. He was a left-hand medium pacer, but he also bowled left-arm orthodox slow. Anyway, I was fielding at mid-on in this game. This is one of the most amazing memories I've got. He came in and he bowled 4 balls medium pace with the keeper back. And he stopped, and very dramatically he called the keeper up to the stumps. He rearranged his field, went back, measured out his run, and came in and bowled a slow left-hand ball. And then he went back and he pushed the wicket-keeper back, and he finished the over, 8-ball over, with bowling medium pace. And I went up to him after he'd finished and I said, Malcolm, I said, what was all that about? He said, that was my slower ball. I couldn't believe it. Then there's one more memory from Adelaide. We're playing a game against Port Adelaide. That's right. I got myself. My bowling went off because I think I damaged my wrist and didn't have the same penetration. So my batting developed again, and I got into the first 11 of district cricket as a batsman. Came up in the first game against Woodville, and they had 5 state bowlers in their team. But I actually got off to a good start, and I made a 50. So things were looking up. And then we played a game against Port Adelaide, as I mentioned, and it was a green wicket, and we were put in. And their opening attack was Neil Hawke, who'd just come back from a very successful tour in 1964, Tour of England, and Eric Freeman, who was also the other Australian opening. I played a lot against Eric through the grades, and David Sincock and some of these other players. So it's one of those situations where I just wish, in retrospect, I had done something different, because the Adelaide newspaper had they used to bring out a copy. The early copy would come out around about 2:30 or 3 o'clock, and in those days they always had a sort of the scores of the district cricket and gave a little description of what was going on. And in that particular version, the little summary went something like, University were in early trouble against Port Adelaide. But Brent Paul was batting well. However, when he was dismissed for 3, University had slumped to 3 for 4. And why I never cut it out, I'll never know. But we were dismissed for 30, which was an all-time low of any team I ever played in.